Hey friends, Elizabeth here, and I'm really excited to be filming my first video of 2025. Technically, I posted videos in 2025, but those were filmed last year. This is my first video that I'm filming in the new year, and as has become tradition on my channel, I'm starting with one of my favorite videos of the year, which is filling out my book bracket spread in my reading journal, so I can go from my favorite book of every month all the way down to my absolute favorite read of the year. I love doing this spread. I love that it allows me to figure out my favorite as someone who is highly indecisive and reads a lot. So hopefully you are as excited for this video as I am. Well, maybe not quite as excited, but you know, you're interested, and we'll see how quickly I can get through it. Sometimes this is a longer, more torturous, painful experience. Sometimes I immediately know my favorites and it goes very quickly. So we'll see what happens this year. So without further ado, I have my Notion reading tracker pulled up on my phone, and I filtered all my reads for 2024 by their star rating, including 4- and 5-star reads, just in case there's a month where I didn't have a 5-star read. If you want to know more about my Notion reading tracker, I'll link the video where I do a full walkthrough in the description box, so you can watch that video and see how I handle my digital reading tracking. That's the other half of my tracking that goes along with my reading journal. Okay, so enough rambling, let's get into it. So starting in January, it looks like I had 6 books that had either 4 or 5 stars. So because I have so many options, I'm going to eliminate the 4-star reads right away. So we have 4 5-star reads in January, and those are Monstrous Volume 7, Devourer by Marjorie Liu, The Valley of Horses by Jean M. Auel, which is a reread of a childhood favorite series, Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad, and The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. I think right off the bat, I'm going to eliminate Monstrous Volume 7 because it's hard for an individual volume of a graphic novel to compete against full novels. And I think I'm going to eliminate The Valley of Horses as well, just because it's a reread. It's a book I've reread about 1,000,000 times in my life, and some of what makes it 5 stars is the nostalgia of it being a childhood favorite. So I'm going to eliminate that one as well. So that leaves us with Enter Ghost and The Reading List, which is hard because I love both of these books a lot. I'm already struggling. This is already so hard. I love them both for mostly very different reasons. They're very different books, but I feel like some of their strongest suits are actually quite similar in their character development and development of complex yet rich and compelling relationships between characters, and not romantic relationships, but all the other types of relationships you can have with people, including sibling relationships and other family relationships, and also sort of unlikely friendships and different dynamics of friendships and camaraderie. But they also have very different, deeper themes, and they each have their own type of commentary, but on very different things. Oh my goodness. The Reading List was our book club pick for January, and you'll probably see book club picks come up more than once as an option because we tend to do a great job in the book club over on Patreon of picking books that end up being really fantastic. Not every time, you know, but a lot of the time. Oh, this is so hard. You know what? As much as I love both of these, and I truly do, I think I have to give it to Enter Ghost. I just really loved Enter Ghost, and I know it's not going to work for everyone. It is in some ways very highly specific, but it's highly specific in exactly the right way for me. I feel like I'm the perfect audience for this book, especially with a focus on theater and putting on a play, especially Shakespeare specifically, which is something I have a history with. I have a theater degree. I love Shakespeare. So, you know, this isn't going to be for everyone, but I really loved this book so much, and I feel like I talk about it a lot, which is usually a good sign. As much as I really loved The Reading List, it super surprised me. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. I thought it was going to be kind of book club fodder and maybe be a 3-star read, but it had so much heart and sincerity that it really captured my emotions. But Enter Ghost is just one that I truly believe. I mean, you can let me know in the comments if you feel like I've been talking about the ones I pick as much as I feel like I have, but I feel like I've brought up Enter Ghost so many times. So that's it. I'm going to go with Enter Ghost. I'm not going to overthink it too much. I say as I've already overthought it so much, but I'm not going to keep overthinking it. I'm just going to go with it. So Enter Ghost is going to be my favorite for January. Okay, so favorite for January, selected. I'm going to scroll to February. Okay, looks like in February I had no 5-star reads, unfortunately, but I did have 3 4-star reads. So I have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. And again, A Deadly Education was our book club pick for February. All 3 of these are fantasy. Divine Rivals and A Deadly Education are both YA, but Ninth House is adult, although it does feel maybe more like new or a bridge between YA and adult in a lot of ways. It does have more adult content and some darker themes, but the characters are still quite young and they're in college. Oh gosh, which is my favorite of these? Ninth House is definitely the darkest of the three, and then I'd say A Deadly Education next, and then Divine Rivals is the least dark, but it still has some darker themes. Oh my gosh, this is so hard. It also feels a little unfair because I've read all three books in the Scholomance trilogy, so A Deadly Education, and then The Last Graduate and The Golden Enclaves, I think is the third book. And Ninth House, I've read the second book, Hellbent. I don't know if there's going to be more in this series or not. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then Divine Rivals, I know there's at least a second book. And I have the audiobook downloaded on my phone, but I have not started it. So as much as I'm trying to judge solely by the first book, part of my brain is also kind of taking into account how I felt about the sequels, just have more information and more knowledge of the world of A Deadly Education and Ninth House than I do Divine Rivals. And I do think to a certain extent it's totally fair and natural for later books in a series to kind of color your feelings about the first book. I think this is the effect that's making me want to eliminate Ninth House right away, just because I found Hellbent still enjoyable and interesting, but it was kind of disappointing after the first book, and there were aspects of it that I just found completely ridiculous and very silly. So I think I'm going to eliminate Ninth House for that reason. And there are things in the first book that bugged me. There's some inclusion of some potentially triggering content that felt a little excessive and a little leading into trauma. And that leaves us with two books that are both very similar, but also very different. Divine Rivals and A Deadly Education. Both are YA fantasy, but they have very different vibes. Divine Rivals is a lot more cozy and wholesome and lyrical while still having some darker themes. And it has sort of a subplot of romance. A Deadly Education has much more overt, darker themes and is definitely the dark academia magic school kind of vibe. It also has a much more polarizing protagonist who took a while to grow on me, but she did eventually grow on me. I think I'm going to, just trying to go off my gut, I think I'm going to go with A Deadly Education. I think. Yes, I think I am. I just feel like it has stuck more in my mind. And part of that is definitely because I read the rest of the series and I have not read on in the Divine Rivals world yet, which definitely is making it clearer in my mind. But there are just a lot of aspects of the Scholomance that I find really intriguing and creative and unique. And I do feel like the protagonist, as much as she annoyed me at the start of the book, she does have a very clear voice. And I really like that in a character. And honestly, as much as I remember liking both protagonists of Divine Rivals from the start, I can't remember that much about them now, about their individual personalities. Again, kind of an unfair advantage because I only read the one book instead of three, but I think for that reason, I'm going to go with A Deadly Education, but this is very close. This is very close and hard. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so A Deadly Education is going to go here. That was very messy, but we're just going to live with it. Okay, moving on to March. It looks like in March I had 5 books that were 4 or 5 stars and only one 5-star read, which was Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. This is a nonfiction that I read for the Goodreads Choice Awards winners video that I do every single year. But do I want... This might be... Oh, this is hard because, you know, logically you would think I only had one 5-star read, so it's automatically going to be the pick. But I'm not a huge nonfiction reader, and as much as this book was very interesting and I thought it was very well done, it's 5 stars based on the criteria that I personally have for nonfiction and what I look for in nonfiction. But nonfiction is not my preferred genre, and a 5-star nonfiction is not equal to me in my heart to a 5-star fiction. I try to rate and judge books based on what they are, so I'm not gonna, you know, totally fall in love with all the people involved in a nonfiction book and be really invested in their lives to give nonfiction 5 stars, but that's something that usually is the case for fiction. And because of that, and because I'm a character-driven reader, when I do fall in love with characters and I'm really invested in their lives, I'm going to love a book much more. And I feel like I really struggle to love and say I genuinely love any nonfiction. There have been a couple over the years that I would put in that category, but very few. So all that to say, I wouldn't say I loved Poverty by America. I just think it deserved 5 stars. It did what it set out to do, and it did it very well. So I'm going to eliminate Poverty by America. So that leaves me with 4 4-star reads, 2 of which are book 2 and 3 in the Scholomance series. And I'm not going to pick either of those because I didn't like them as much as book 1, and I've already picked book 1. So that leaves us with Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez, which was our book club pick for March, and it's horror, adult horror. And then She is a Haunting, which is also horror, but it's YA horror by Trang Tan Tran. I would be happy with either of them being on here, to be honest. They do have very different vibes. The style of horror is different. The writing style is very different. And I'm sure part of this is just going to be, you know, that I am an adult. So I am not the target audience for She is a Haunting, but I definitely connected more with Our Share of Night and enjoyed the process of reading it a little bit more, and it stuck with me a little bit more, even though I think I've actually spoken about She is a Haunting more, just because I feel like it's a really great example of YA horror, and probably the best YA horror I've read all year, and maybe ever. For that reason, I feel like I've brought up She's a Haunting a lot. If you look at their stories and their themes through a more general lens, they do have a lot of similarities in the kinds of ideas they're exploring, though they are set in very different parts of the globe, and so they're focused on different specific context. But Our Share of Night is just a little bit more expansive. It covers a longer period of time and explores more characters and draws from more points in history and more sort of subgenres of the themes it's looking at, whereas She is a Haunting is much more specific and much more set in one period of time and looking back at one point in history, which is also still very interesting. But I just feel like there's maybe more to chew on with Our Share of Night, which is something that I am a sucker for. I love books that are really expansive in what they explore if they do a good job, and I did feel like Our Share of Night did a really good job. So anyway, all that to say, they're both great. I would highly recommend both, but I think, again, for me, as someone who was in my 30s, Our Share of Night was definitely just a tiny bit more up my alley and felt more suited to me as a reader overall when I'm looking at both of them. But She's a Haunting, again, is possibly the best YA horror I've ever read, and definitely very great, and I highly recommend. But I think I'm going to go with Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. And that means we have 2 book club picks on the board. Whoa, okay, in April I have so many options. Oh no. Okay, April, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh my God. Okay, in April, 8 books that were 4 or 5 stars. One of those was 4, Unbury Carol by Josh Malerman, and the other 7 were 5-star reads. That's mind-boggling. Wow, April was a great reading month. 7 5-star reads, which were The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell, A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon, Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler, Little Eve by Catriona Ward, Wool by Hugh Howey, and Let Us Descend by Jasmine Ward. And Let Us Descend was our book club pick for April, so another contender from the book club. Part of the explanation for this is that this was the month I did my reading sequels to books I loved video, and I ended up giving all 4 of the sequels I read for that video 5 stars. So that's part of why I have so many. And those 4 books were sort of magical realism, historical fiction, science fiction, fantasy, and dystopian realistic sci-fi. And then there's Little Eve, which is horror, and Wool, which is science fiction. And then Let Us Descend is historical fiction. So we have kind of a broad selection here. And this is so hard because I have strong feelings about a lot of these books. A lot of these books are, you know, some of my favorite books I've read in recent years, which for obvious reasons makes this even harder. Oh my God. Okay. How do I even remotely start to eliminate things from this? That is wild. Okay. I mean, part of my brain is thinking that I should eliminate the 4 books I read for my reading sequels video because they are all second books in a series, which doesn't really mean anything, but I've kind of been eliminating later books in a series automatically so far. So part of me feels like I should keep doing that. But I also loved all 4 of these books so much that that is hard to do, and I don't really want to. This is so hard. Oh my God. Okay. This is terrible. Okay, I'm gonna pause because I am feeling distress over trying to pick between these. So I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna have a snack, and hopefully I'll be able to come back feeling more decisive, because I have a feeling I'm just gonna sit here for 30 minutes staring at the list, feeling stressed because how do I pick a favorite? Okay, I'll be back. I'm gonna have a snack. Okay, I'm back. I had a snack. I'm feeling a little bit more emotionally equipped to handle this decision. So we're on April. It occurred to me while I was making and then eating my snack that I should probably leave any of the 4-star options as possible wild cards, in that I will attempt to pick my favorite from each month chronologically, as I always do, but any of the ones that are 4-star reads, I reserve the right to replace with a 5-star read from another month, especially if I have a month where I have lots of 5-star reads and it really feels unfair to leave some of them out. So far, Enter Ghost is the only nominee that is totally solid, totally uneliminatable. Eliminatable? That's not a word. You get what I mean. A Deadly Education and Our Share of Night, however, were both 4-star reads. So both of these could be replaced with another book if I so choose. Okay? I think I did this last year too. So there is precedent set by myself. I don't know why I feel like there needs to be precedent when I am making all the rules, but anyway. Okay, so for April, I've been thinking about it, and I went back to watch the ranking portion of my reading sequels of books I loved video because I realized that I could kind of combine my initial feelings as soon as I finished them and also how they have stayed in my mind since then to pick my favorite, at least of those 4. And my favorite at the time was Parable of the Talents, which makes sense. And it still is a giant in my mind. And my second favorite was A Day of Fallen Night, which also has stayed really prominently in my mind since then. So both of those I might want to include somewhere on here. And of the other options that weren't in that video, I think I'm going to eliminate Little Eve and Wool, even though both of them are great. They're both 5-star reads. Would highly recommend. Neither of them are quite on the same level, using my own arbitrary criteria. And I honestly don't know how I can pick. All 3 of these are fantastic. These are 3 of the best books I read all year. All 3 of them have stayed with me over the months. I think I'm going to put Let Us Descend here as my pick for April. And then when I pit Parable of the Talents up against Let Us Descend, it's almost impossible. They are, again, very different books. They're different genres. One is historical fiction, one is near future fiction, but they both explore some of the most devastating, horrifying aspects of the human condition and of society. They both moved me and touched me deeply, and I feel so many strong feelings about both of them. They're also both so beautifully written, and they're so poignant, and they're thematically so relevant. I really struggle to pick a favorite. But again, just because I gave Parable of the Sower a chance last year, I am going to go with Let Us Descend instead. In this spot, like I said, on my scrap piece of paper, I'm going to write out both Parable of the Talents and A Day of Fallen Night, and they're going to be on standby because I might have to swap some things for my own peace of mind. So I'm going to move on to May, and in May I read 4 books that I gave 5 stars. So I have Galatea by Madeline Miller, which is a novella, then Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, which is a speculative fiction. It's sort of a blend of sci-fi and fantasy. Monstrous Volume 8, Inferno by Marjorie Liu, a continuation of that speculative fiction horror graphic novel. And then Role Playing by Kathy Yardley, which is a contemporary romance. All 4 of those were 5 stars. And this... I feel like this is going to be hard again. I think I'm going to immediately eliminate Monstrous Volume 8 for the same reasons that I eliminated Monstrous Volume 7. Still great, still love the series. I feel like once it's finished, I might nominate the entire series as kind of a single story. And then I also struggle with Galatea a little bit. It is a novella. It was great, but it's quite short. And it is a retelling, so it's not a totally unique world or brand new unique characters. So part of me wants to eliminate it for that reason, even though, again, highly recommend. You should read Galatea if you haven't yet. And this is hard because they're so different. And I do struggle to choose something like role-playing because usually romance is not my favorite genre. It's not my go-to, but this is one of my favorite romances between a man and woman that I've ever read in my life. So it kind of, gets a little bit more love. I feel like it deserves a little bit more love and a little more recognition. I do also feel like I've talked about role-playing a lot on my channel. But Gideon the Ninth was really great. And I've only read book 1 and 2 in this series, but I've loved both book 1 and book 2. And I'm excited to read book 3 and 4. This is so hard. I really love role-playing and I highly recommend it. And I might actually add it as well here to my little subs bench, just in case. But I think I'm going to go with Gideon the Ninth, which, ironically, was also a book club pick. Okay, in June I had 6 books that I gave either 5 or 4 stars, so I am going to eliminate the 4-star reads right off the bat. So that leaves me with 4 options for June. An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, which I'm going to eliminate right away because it's the sequel and I already nominated book 1, even though in some ways I liked Harrow the Ninth even more than Gideon the Ninth, but I don't want to get into it. I already nominated the first book, so I'm just going to leave it. I can't make this more complicated for myself than it already is. Then I have The Queen of 14th Street, which is a novella, and it's quite short, and it's only in audiobook form. It's sort of a radio play. And for that reason, I might eliminate it, even though it was really great and I highly recommend it, because it is only in audiobook form and it's almost more like theater, just in a recorded audio format. And then In Tongues by Thomas Grattan, which is contemporary literary fiction. Okay, so I guess I eliminated 2 just going through them there. And I must admit, my opinion here is being influenced a bit by having read the rest of the series after An Ember in the Ashes and being very disappointed in the following books. Check out my most disappointing reads of 2024 video if you want to hear more on that. But because of that, it's kind of soured my feelings for book 1, unfortunately, which makes me sad because book 1 was so fantastic. But I think for that reason, this decision has been made pretty easy, and I'm going to go with In Tongues by Thomas Grattan. I can imagine why a lot of people would not like this book, but if you like literary fiction, if you like character-driven books, if you like reading books about queer people discovering their own identity and finding found family amongst other queer people and living in the big city, coming of age, realizing that you're actually kind of a selfish person and trying to remedy that, messy relationships, a healthy dose of ennui, some unexpectedly wholesome friendships, I would recommend In Tongues. I really, really loved it. Again, I have seen some people whose opinions I respect not enjoy this book, or this wasn't their cup of tea. But for me, I really, really liked it. So I am going to pick it as my favorite for June. So let's move on to the second half of the year, getting into July. And in July, I have 5 books that got 4 or 5 stars. Starting with the 4-star reads, I had Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Pew by Catherine Lacey, and Red Side Story by Jasper Fforde. And then for 5 stars, I had A Power Unbound by Freya Marske and There by Tommy Orange. And honestly, this is a very easy decision, as much as all of these books are great for different reasons, and I loved them all for a variety of reasons. I think I have to go with There by Tommy Orange. This book absolutely destroyed me. I thought it was gorgeous. It is thematically very up my alley. It is very character driven. The characters are vividly drawn and compelling and complex. And the story itself was somehow both devastating and hopeful. And I just felt so many feelings while reading it. This was another book club pick, and such a good pick at that. So this must be the fastest decision I've come to in this video so far, but There is 100% going to be my choice for July. Moving on to August, we have 4 options. So starting with the 4-star reads, we have Don't Want You Like a Best Friend by Emma R. Albin, which is a historical sapphic romance. Pluralities by Avi Silver, which is a speculative fiction, sci-fi, lit fic, coming of age, gender discovery sort of book. And then The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride, which is historical fiction, and that was our book club pick for August. Then my one 5-star read for August, which is going to be my immediate pick, was The Weak Spot by Lucy Elvin, which is literary fiction, but I read it for my Weird Books reading vlog, and I loved this book. I just loved it so much. I will have the reading vlog in the description box so you can watch that to hear my complete thoughts on the book. But it is strange, but also very heartfelt and eerie and compelling. And the writing style, sort of the form of the book itself, added so much to the story and really enhanced the experience for me. And I just thought it was fantastic. So I'm going to put The Weak Spot here as my favorite in August. Okay, we're making progress. I feel like I'm going faster now, which is probably a good thing. Okay, moving on to September. In September, I had 5 options. So starting with the 4-star reads, there's only one 4-star read, A Sky Beyond the Storm by Sabaa Tahir. This is book 4 in the Ember in the Ashes series. I'm going to eliminate it because it's only a 4-star read. And then for 5-star reads in September, I have If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga, The Long Cut by Emily Hall, Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, and Against the Loveless Sea by Susan Abuhawa. And, this is hard. Okay, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English and The Long Cut were both in my Weird Books reading vlog. Of the 2 of those, I preferred The Long Cut. I can't remember now if I put The Weak Spot or The Long Cut as my top favorite of that video, but they were definitely very close, sort of neck and neck. So I think I'm going to eliminate If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, even though, again, I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was fantastic. Highly recommend it. If you like weird literature, because it's definitely weird. in the structure. But check out my reading vlog linked in the description box for more details. Then Wide Sargasso Sea, which I read in my double feature reading vlog that was Jane Eyre and then Wide Sargasso Sea. Fantastic, loved it. Historical fiction and sort of a retelling slash prequel of another book. Some people call it fan fiction, but I don't think that's quite accurate, even though it is based on a story that someone else wrote. It's not really fan fiction in the traditional sense of the word. And it's considered a classic in its own right at this point. And then Against the Loveless Sea, this is by a Palestinian author. This was our book club pick for September. And it was, I feel like I've used this word so many times in this video, but often when a book is devastating, that means it really moved me emotionally. And it probably will end up being one of my favorite books of the year. I guess I like being in emotional distress, but this book was devastating. A very difficult read. I would definitely recommend checking out the content warnings before reading this one. It is intense and covers a lot of dark topics. If I have not already written the Goodreads review and included my content warnings, that is coming soon. I am working my way through my backlog. I got behind at the end of this year. But anyway, I don't know how I pick a favorite of these, to be honest. I think as much as I really enjoyed Wide Sargasso Sea, because it is sort of dependent on another book, I feel like some people said in the comments that they read Wide Sargasso Sea without realizing it was sort of a prequel for Jane Eyre written by another author, and so they didn't have that context, and some of them still enjoyed it and some of them didn't. But I still feel like it's kind of dependent on another piece of literature. You kind of have to read Jane Eyre, or I feel like my experience was enhanced by reading Jane Eyre first and then reading Wide Sargasso Sea, because it is in a lot of ways a commentary on Jane Eyre or a critique of Jane Eyre. So it kind of goes into the same category for me as books that are later in a series that feel like they're dependent on the first book. And so I'm more hesitant to include them here for whatever reason. Again, I don't know. These are just my arbitrary boundaries and rules. So then that leaves me with The Long Cut and Against the Loveless Sea. And that is honestly so hard because they are such polar opposite books. I don't even know if I could think of books that were much more opposite than these two. And oh God, I loved both of them so much, but for very different reasons. I think because it was much more, it made me feel a lot more emotions. And because The Long Cut was actually a very frustrating reading experience in the first half and then ended up really winning me over in the second half, I think I'm going to pick Against the Loveless Sea as my pick. And then I will 100% put The Long Cut on my little backups list, because it's still definitely one of my favorite reads of this year, even though it is so ridiculously strange and it was very frustrating to read in a lot of ways and kind of made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. But that was part of the experience. Okay, so moving into October, let's see. There are a lot. How many do I have in October? October was the month that I read a bunch of Stephen King, and I also reread the entire Anne of Green Gables series, so there's a lot of options here. In October, I had 8 4-star reads, and I had 3 5-star reads, which were 3 books from the Anne of Green Gables series. Anne of Green Gables, the first book, Anne of the Island, which is book 3, and Rilla of Ingleside, which is book 8. And part of me wonders if I should leave this one blank because these were all rereads from my childhood. But while I did read Anne of Green Gables hundreds of times, I had only read the entire series once, and I had really forgotten everything about the other books in the series. So book 3 and 8 kind of felt like it was the first time I was reading them. So in some ways, I feel like they should be contenders. But then I look at the list of my other options from other months, and part of me wants to be able to give one of those books a chance. Oh, it's so hard. I think what I'm going to do is, when I ranked these at the end of my video, I remember I put Anne of Green Gables book 1 first, then Rilla of Ingleside book 8, and then book 3, Anne of the Island. But because I've reread Anne of Green Gables so many times, I kind of want to eliminate it in the same way that I eliminated Valley of the Horses and other sort of rereads. And again, technically Rilla of Ingleside is a reread, but it felt very new to me because I only read it once when I was 9 or something like that, maybe 10. So for that reason, I think I'm going to put Rilla of Ingleside here, but I will, as much as this is a 5-star read, I will kind of leave this as a possible option that could be replaced with one of my runner-up books. along with A Deadly Education and Our Share of Night, depending on how I feel when I get to the end of this. So that is my pick for October. Rilla of Ingleside by L.M. Montgomery, a Canadian icon. So moving on to November, I had 3 4 or 5-star books. A Curious Incident by Vicky Delaney, cozy mystery series. Uglies by Scott Westerfeld, which was a reread. I was rereading it because I was going to make a video comparing it to the Netflix adaptation, but I kind of got sidetracked by other things and I never ended up watching the adaptation or making that video. But let me know in the comments if you still would be interested in a comparison and sort of critique of the Uglies book, which I read when it first came out back in the day, and the Netflix adaptation, because it could be interesting. I thought it would be interesting, which is why I started working on it. But anyway, it's not as relevant anymore. It's not as timely because I got distracted with other things. But anyway, Uglies also got 4 stars. And then Wicked by Gregory Maguire, which was another childhood favorite that I reread so I could compare it to the film. I did end up making that video, so you can watch it if you want. It'll be linked in the description box. But that was my only 5-star read for November. But again, I feel like I kind of have to eliminate both Wicked and Uglies because they're rereads of childhood favorites that I remembered very clearly. So while it was, a little bit of a rediscovery, in some ways I remembered enough of the plots that it wasn't really a fresh experience. So that kind of leaves me with no options for November, which on the one hand is kind of sad, but on the other hand means that I could give one of these books a spot, which would be awesome. The only problem is picking which one of these books gets a spot. And I don't know how to do that. No, I do. I do know how to do that. I think if I try to keep up with my loose rule of mostly eliminating sequels or later books in a series, that leaves me with role-playing and The Long Cut. And out of those two, The Long Cut is my favorite. I feel like role-playing is at a disadvantage because it's a genre that is not my favorite genre in general, contemporary romance, but The Long Cut was really great. So I'm glad to be able to give it a spot on this list. And we're on to the final month of the year. So in December, I have 4 options and all 4 were in my sci-fi reading vlog where I read the 10 finalists for the Goodreads Choice Awards in the sci-fi category, which I, again, will link in the description box for full-length reviews of all of them. So my 4-star reads from that video were The Mercy of Gods, The Other Valley, and The Stardust Grail, but I had 1 5-star read, and if you watch that video, you already know, and you already know which one I'm going to pick immediately as my favorite from this month, which was I Cheerfully Refuse by Leif Enger. I'm obsessed with this book. It was so good. It broke my heart. It was beautiful. I loved it immensely. And I was talking to one of my best friends and she had also read it and I was gushing about it. And then I complained that it was selling for $43 Canadian for the hardcover and the paperback isn't out yet in Canada or maybe anywhere. I don't know. But anyway, I was complaining because that's ridiculous. How are books that expensive now? And so I said I couldn't really justify buying myself a copy even though I wanted one so badly because it was so good. And so she sent me a copy and I just thought that was the sweetest thing ever. I love you, Shannon, if you're watching this video. You're the best. So I Cheerfully Refuse is definitely getting this spot. Here it is in all its glory. Look how beautiful. I'm going to put it on my bookshelves. I did a mixed media read where I listened to the audiobook and read the ebook simultaneously, but I'm very glad to have a physical copy and it's going to go on my shelves immediately in a place of honor. And I also think I'll try to find a time to reread it pretty soon so I can annotate to my heart's content. I'm very excited about that. So that is definitely my pick for December. Okay, so these are ostensibly my favorite top 12 books of the year. Enter Ghost, A Deadly Education, Our Share of Night, Let Us Descend, Gideon the Ninth, In Tongues, There There, The Weak Spot, Against the Loveless Sea, Rilla of Ingleside, The Long Cut, and I Cheerfully Refuse. And on my runner-ups list, we have Parable of the Talents, A Day of Fallen Night, Role-Playing, and A Power Unbound. So now I need to compare the 4-star reads and my 1 reread and see if I want to replace them with anything, which is also going to be hard. I think for sure I'm going to replace A Deadly Education, as much as this was a really fun book and I really enjoyed it. I just didn't love it as much as any of these 4. So the question is which one? And I don't know the answer to that. Let me sip some tea and stroke my chin. Parable of the Talents has to go somewhere, even though I know I put the first book on my list last year. It's just such a good book and it would feel wrong to not include it here. So it has to go somewhere. And then looking at the other ones, as much as I love role-playing, and again, it's one of my favorite contemporary romance between a man and woman that I've ever read, it's still a romance. And again, nothing against romances, it's just not my favorite genre. So I think as much as I love it, it's gonna be eliminated. And then the question is, A Power Unbound and A Day of Fallen Night. Do I want to replace Our Share of Night with either of these? Or Rilla of Ingleside? Yes and no. I feel conflicted. I think I should replace Our Share of Night because if I replace A Deadly Education with Parable of the Talents, Our Share of Night will be my only 4-star here. And it was really great, but again, 4 stars, not 5. I think out of these two, A Power Unbound and A Day of Fallen Night, as much as they're both great and they're both queer fantasy and they both have romance in them, A Day of Fallen Night is less romance heavy and also just masterful and has a huge scope in the world building. And the political systems are so complicated and it has far more point of view characters and they're all amazing. Power Unbound is great, like really, really great. And I really loved it, but it's much less ambitious in its scope. While it does have some interesting themes for sure, it has fewer themes that really captured my mind and made me think about a lot of different things and get really analytical, which I love doing. So out of the two, I'm gonna have to pick A Day of Fallen Night, even though again, A Power Unbound is a really great book and I highly, highly recommend the whole series. Go read it. It's such fun. I'm going to put Parable of the Talents right here. And then A Day of Fallen Night. Again, not to say that A Deadly Education or Our Share of Night are not fantastic books, because they are. They are. But this is about my favorites, you know, with my very specific preferences and point of view and blah, blah, blah. Okay, you get it. So those are my favorites, and now I'm stressed because now I have to pit these against each other. But I'm going to do what I've done in past years, which is allow myself a little bit more time and a little more deliberation for my first 12. But as I go through all these head-to-heads, I'm going to try to just list the 2 titles and then immediately, whichever one my gut goes to, I'm going to pick without any second thought. Because otherwise we literally will be here all night until tomorrow, if not longer. And after how much of a hassle it was trying to upload my almost 3-hour video last month, I need to not do that for a while. So we need to keep this snappy. Starting with, here we go. I'm stressed. Everything's fine. Okay. So starting with Enter Ghost and Parable of the Talents. And of these two, my favorite is Parable of the Talents. I feel like I feel literal pain when I have to choose a favorite. No, okay, I can't let myself second guess. I just have to do it. Okay, Parable of the Talents by the incomparable Octavia E. Butler. Okay. Whew, I need a breath for a second before I move on. I'm not playing this up to be dramatic for a YouTube video. I legitimately am struggling. My husband laughs every year when I have to film this video because he knows how much I suffer having to pick favorites. He has to live with me being indecisive every day. And we've been together for a decade, so he really knows. Okay, next one. Okay, A Day of Fallen Night and Let Us Descend. Let Us Descend. Oh God, that hurts. That actually hurts so much. Oh, I'm sorry, A Day of Fallen Night. I love you too. You'll always be in my heart. Okay, I can't dwell on it. Okay, Gideon the Ninth and In Tongues. Gideon the Ninth. Honestly, that one kind of surprised me. I thought I was going to say In Tongues, and then that's not what came out. But honestly, I think it makes sense. Again, they're both great. They're both very queer, which we love. But Gideon the Ninth was just such a breath of fresh air. I really loved it. Moving on, we have There There and The Weak Spot, and this is going to be There There. And I'm so sorry to The Weak Spot because you're such a great book and I love you so much. But There There is just so freaking good. It's such a great book. Next up we have Against the Loveless Sea and Rilla of Ingleside. And the winner is Against the Loveless Sea. I'm sorry, Rilla of Ingleside. That is also such a great book. I feel like for people who have only read Anne of Green Gables, you really aren't gonna fully, I mean, there's definitely a lot of similarities, but Rilla of Ingleside is a very different kind of book, especially because it takes place during World War I. Okay, and our final pairing here, we have The Long Cut and I Cheerfully Refuse, and no one is surprised, I Cheerfully Refuse is my pick. I just loved this book so much. There's also a little bit of recency bias, I'm sure, but oh, it was just so good. Okay, so We're down to my 6th favorite of the year, Parable of the Talents, Let Us Descend, Gideon the Ninth, There, Against the Loveless Sea, and I Cheerfully Refuse. Yeah, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to name the two, and then whatever comes into my head first is the one I'm going to pick with no questions asked and no waffling. I'm saying this partially as a reminder to myself to keep myself accountable so I don't let myself debate for 20 minutes for each of these. Starting with Parable of the Talents and Let Us Descend. Oh God, that's really hard. Parable of the Talents. Oh, that was a really difficult pairing. That was really hard. That was a close call. You know, once we get to this point, it's always a close call because these are my top absolute favorite books of the entire year, and they're all fantastic. And they could all happily sit as my favorite of the year and be worth that title at this point. So it just gets harder and harder, which is why I let myself think about it less and less. For my own well-being. Okay, so next we have Gideon the Ninth and There, and my choice is There. I feel good about that. Okay, moving on. Last pairing, Against the Loveless Sea, and I Cheerfully Refuse. I Cheerfully Refuse. Again, possibly a bit of recency bias, but I was so deeply moved by this book. I loved it so much. I mean, if you go watch that reading vlog, if you haven't seen it already, you will see me sobbing as I finish it. I had so many feelings. Okay, now we're down to the last 3. So what I usually do at this point is feel stressed and want to give up on the video altogether. But what I do is I, again, will just name the 3 finalists, my top 3 books of the year, and then again, wherever my gut goes becomes my favorite of the year, and it's so hard and terrible, and I hate it so much. Okay, so we have 3 options here: near future, apocalyptic, climate destruction, and also societal collapse with a little bit of science fiction. Lit fic with a dash of sci-fi. There is just entirely contemporary / literary fiction. And I Cheerfully Refuse is kind of similar to Parable of the Talents, near future, climate and social collapse, literary fiction with a little bit of a sci-fi sprinkle. But I feel like this is going to be painful, so I'm kind of procrastinating. And by kind of, I mean 100% definitely procrastinating. Okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to just do it. Yes, I am. Am I doing it? Have I started yet? Can I pick multiple favorites? Oh God, I hate this so much. I don't know. Oh, why do I do this to myself over and over again? Ugh. And you know what? This is even harder because Parable of the Talents and I Cheerfully Refuse are so similar in so many ways. They're exploring a lot of similar ideas, which makes it harder to compare them to me because they're not even about different topics, really. I know I said I was going to do it fast, but I legitimately can't make a decision. It's like my brain refuses to just pick one. I swear I was just going to name all 3 and then go for it, but I am feeling fight or flight or freeze because all 3 of these are amazing. Literally any of these 3 could be my favorite of the year and be so incredibly worthy, and I would be very happy for them to be my favorite of the year. And all 3 of them made me cry at least once, if not multiple times. And all 3 of them feel deeply relevant for the current moment we are in as a planet, both politically and socially, and also environmentally, and all very, very good. I know I don't have a face cam because I look like a hot mess right now. I'm in my pajamas with no makeup on and my hair is in a top knot. But just imagine my face. It is a face of defeat and exhaustion and sadness, because how do I pick one of these? I can't. I swear this might be the hardest top 3 I've ever had in a book bracket video. I actually just went back and rewatched my decision from the 3 finalists from the last several videos, trying to give myself some motivation. And I made the decision so much quicker in all those videos. And I feel like looking back on it, the decision is so much clearer to me now for all of those. But I feel like I had some really, really, really incredible reads this year, and it's making it so much harder. Okay, one of my cameras and my mic processor thingy both died, and I took that as a sign from the universe to take 20 minutes to just meditate on this a little bit more, let it percolate, think a bit more. And as absolutely devastated as I am to have to pick between these because, oh my God, how dare I do this to myself? I've decided, and it was not easy, okay? All three of these are incredible. All three of these are fantastic and amazing, and I highly, 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 highly recommend them along with all the books here, but especially these three. Oh my God, they're just so, so fantastic. But if I had to only pick one, which is what this whole video is about, I would have to pick Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler, and I still feel so conflicted about this choice. I just have to. I've thought about it, I've agonized, and of these three, I think this is the best. But it hurts my heart legitimately to not give this position to There, and I cheerfully refuse. Just know in my heart, this is a three-way tie, okay? But when I engage my mind along with my heart, it's still a three-way tie. No, okay. I'm going with Parable of the Talents. I have to pick one, and that's what I'm picking. Yep, that's what I'm picking. I can't even, like, I don't know how clearly this is coming across just through my voice and my hand gestures, but this was legitimately one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. This was the closest top three I've ever had in a book bracket video, and this was the most painful choice I've had to make. And I'm still kind of second guessing myself, but I'm gonna stick with it because at the end of the day, Parable of the Talents is an incredible book. This duology is an incredible duology, and Octavia E. Butler was an incomparable talent, and I don't feel bad about this being my favorite and saying this is my favorite of the year. I think it deserves it so much. And again, it's so deeply relevant to our current moment in history. This is my choice. I feel conflicted more than I ever have before in a book bracket video, but I hope you enjoyed my indecision and my pain. Here are my top reads of 2024, all my favorites. I tried to share a little bit about each of them and, you know, a little bit about the genre and the reasons why I liked them, but of course this wasn't a full review of all of these, so any of these books that were read for a reading vlog, the reading vlog will be linked in the description box, and if not at the time of publishing this video, hopefully shortly thereafter, I will have finished all my written reviews. So I'll also link my Goodreads reviews for all of these, so you can check those out, and also so you can see full content warning lists, at least all the content or trigger warnings that I personally noticed while reading, so you can be aware and be informed going into reading any of these, because many of them have potentially triggering content. But they're all amazing, they're all fantastic, they're all 5-star reads, and I would highly recommend every single one of them. So feel free to use these books as a little TBR, as a recommendations list. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were. Do you agree with me that they're fantastic 5-star reads? Did you have a different take? Just be gentle, because again, these are my absolute favorite books of the year, so I feel protective over all of them. So you have to be nice, okay? But anyway, let me know your thoughts if you've read any of these. Let me know what your top book of 2024 was. Did you struggle as much as I did to pick it, or did you immediately know? Because if it's the latter, I envy you. So that's it for my 2024 book bracket. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I have so many more videos in the works that I'm very excited for. If you have any requests for videos you'd like to see from me, leave them in the comments down below, because I am building out my loose plan for content for all of 2025. So I'm very open to your suggestions and requests. If you have any recommendations for books that I might like based on my taste, as you can see in this video, also leave those in the comments. I would love more recommendations. So thank you for watching. I appreciate you all so much. If you missed my most disappointing and worst reads of 2024, I'll have those videos linked in the description box. You can check them out. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.